What's up everybody, I am Han. Welcome to another camera comparison video. Today I have this Motorola X30 Pro and a Redmi K50 Ultra. Well, Motorola X30 Pro is a bit special for me because this one comes with a 200 megapixel main sensor. I have never seen a smartphone with a 200 megapixel main sensor. Have you seen? No, because this one is the world's first smartphone to come with a 200 megapixel main sensor. And Redmi K50 Ultra is actually a bit cheaper than Motorola X30 Pro in Chinese market, but I'm not sure about global market because none of these two smartphones have got their global variant released in global market. I have also done another separate camera comparison video between this Motorola X30 Pro and Xiaomi 12S Ultra because Xiaomi 12S Ultra comes with a 1-inch and 1-inch sensor, at least as per specifications, and Motorola X30 Pro comes with a 200 megapixel sensor. So I have thought that that one would also be a very interesting camera comparison video. If you are interested in that video, then please subscribe to this channel, stay tuned, and I will publish that video within a few days. Well, for now, let's check carefully which smartphone has a better exposure, wider dynamic range, better color grading, which smartphone has rendered my skin tone correctly, rendered my clothing colors correctly. I don't think I have to talk about these because Motorola X30 Pro has actually done not a bit better, a lot better than Redmi K50 Ultra. Well, it's a very hot and humid today. It's 42 degrees Celsius over here, so I'm not gonna walk around. Before everything, one request: if you end up liking this video, then please don't forget to click on the like button. Please take a while, support this video and support this channel by subscribing to this channel. I think it would be good to start with human subject photos. Today we have Kim as our model. Anyway, even if both the Redmi K50 Ultra and the Motorola X30 Pro comes with new Samsung sensors, Motorola has a way better 200 megapixel Isocell HP1, while Redmi has used a cheaper 108 megapixel Isocell HM6. The differences are clearly visible. Motorola X30 Pro has got more detail on the subject, better exposure, better skin tone, higher shadow detail, better color grading and sharpness. While Redmi K50 Ultra has poor dynamic range, skin tone is a bit too fair, awful contrast ratio. Altogether, the human subject photos of this K50 Ultra are truly not as good as any other smartphones which comes with a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 SoC. On top of these, Redmi has a trend of beautification, saturated color grading, and it's clear that it has failed to maintain exposure in numerous occasions, mostly under bright sunlight. The main differences between these two smartphones in human subject photos are actually detail on the subject, exposure management, and color grading. Motorola X30 Pro got another point for better human photos. The same place, the same model, but once we have flipped from human photos to portrait photos, difference between these two smartphones just got bigger. Motorola X30 Pro has a Sony IMX663 12 megapixel sensor tagged to a 2x telephoto lens, so Motorola X30 Pro can deliver true 50mm portrait photos, while Redmi K50 Ultra depends on its mediocre main sensor and poor synthetic processing to produce portrait photos. Well, other than Redmi K20 Pro and Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition, none of the Redmi devices has ever had any telephoto lens. But I think it's time to change this pattern cause competitors have started to put telephoto lens and Redmi is just falling behind. In terms of detail, shadow, textures and skin tone, there are differences, and differences are not like negligible or preferential. There is a huge difference in portrait performance. However, when it comes to edge detection and edge cutouts, both have done similarly well. Considering the amount of detail, skin tone, color grading and texture sharpness, I would say Motorola X30 Pro has won this portrait segment and bagged another point. What's your thought on this? Would you like to have a telephoto lens for better portrait photos, or are you happy with a 2 megapixel macro sensor? Cause I would agree to pay an extra 20 to 30 US dollars to get a telephoto lens rather than a gimmicky 2 megapixel macro.
Selfie performance of Xiaomi and Redmi smartphones are as good as mid-range smartphones of some other brands. I don't know why Xiaomi and Redmi can't fix this, or maybe they don't wanna fix this. Well, after checking a lot of selfie photos, I'm truly convinced that Motorola X30 Pro with its 60 megapixel OmniVision OV60A selfie sensor has done way better than Redmi K50 Ultra. Redmi K50 Ultra comes with a Sony IMX596 20 megapixel selfie sensor, but the performance isn't as good as it should be. I am getting frustrated. Another point goes to Motorola X30 Pro. Now I am worried, will Redmi K50 Ultra be able to get a point in this comparison? Definitely we will check 4K video performance and we will compare 4K video clips, but first let's check 1080p video quality under harsh lighting condition. There are a few things that I have noticed while comparing 1080p 60 frames per second video clips. Motorola has better stabilization, wider dynamic range, better exposure and more detail, but shadow isn't so perfectly processed. Textures are sharp enough and X30 Pro definitely have better color grading. After comparing these two video clips, I'm super frustrated with this super flop K50 Ultra. When sunlight directly hits the lens of Redmi K50 Ultra, it totally fails to maintain exposure, but under soft lighting condition, it performs well, HDR kicks in and altogether looks good. However, after comparing a lot of video clips, it's totally clear that Motorola X30 Pro 1080p performance is better than Redmi K50 Ultra. Redmi K50 Pro comes with a HM6 108 megapixel sensor, which is 1 by 1.67 inch in size. Binned pixel size is 1.92 and surprisingly it has 1.6 aperture. While Motorola X30 Pro comes with a HP1 200 megapixel sensor, which is 1 by 1.22 inch in size, which means the size of HP1 is bigger than HM6 and binned pixel size is also bigger and better. It's 2.56 and Motorola X30 Pro actually has a bit lower 1.95 aperture. Well, the thing is, Isocell HP1 supports multi-sampling, which reads out each pixel several times and averages the readings. It also has staggered HDR, which captures short, medium and long exposures to boost dynamic range. Moreover, there is another thing, Smart ISO, which works by combining a low and high ISO shot into one. So even if Motorola X30 Pro has lower aperture, it can get better result. Redmi K50 Ultra main sensor photos in daytime is certainly brighter, but less shadow and more like a bit exposed, while Motorola X30 Pro has slightly wider dynamic range. Motorola has generally kept the tone warm, but there are moments when Redmi has decided to go for an awful warm tone. As usual, there are some differences, and on some shots it's a lot more drastic like this one, and on other shots the differences are subtle. From the beginning of this comparison, you may have noticed Motorola has always grabbed more detail, processed textures with clarity. It also has correctly mapped color tone and the pictures are very close to reality. Here comes one of the biggest differences. Motorola X30 Pro has a 50 megapixel sensor for ultra-wide photos, while Redmi K50 Ultra has a 8 megapixel sensor for ultra-wide photos. Undoubtedly, Motorola X30 Pro has well-balanced highlights, a very good ratio of brightness and contrast. X30 Pro has always managed to render colors, which is almost true to life. Also, I'm not surprised to see Motorola X30 Pro has more detail, sharper textures and wider dynamic range. What can we expect from a poor 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor of Redmi K50 Ultra? They have been using a 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor on all of their devices for almost 2 or 3 years now. I really don't understand. How come nobody is talking about this? Motorola X30 Pro has kept surprising me with its flagship class performance. Motorola X30 Pro comes with a 2x optical zoom telephoto lens. It's a Sony IMX663 12 megapixel sensor, while Redmi has decided to put a 2 megapixel sensor tagged to a macro lens. and they call it a Ultra phone. I have no place to hide my frustration and I'm actually amused. Funny indeed. You don't need to understand rocket science to find the differences in zoom performance. Motorola with its dedicated telephoto lens has grabbed more detail, processed colors with accuracy, and I am surprised to see that in some terrible lighting condition, X30 Pro has kept the tone correct. Kudos to Motorola for doing almost everything correct. As we all know that most of the upper mid-range and budget flagship smartphones performs great in daylight but struggles in artificial lighting. Let's check some indoor low-light photos. When a lot of colors needed to be reproduced, when a lot of detail needed to be processed, usually almost all the Xiaomi and Redmi budget flagship smartphones struggles to render correct and true-to-life colors. Most of the time, Motorola color reproduction is way better than Redmi. There are more shadow detail and more textures are processed with clarity. It doesn't matter whether you shoot with the main sensor or with the ultra-wide lens. Indoor photos of both these smartphones keeps the same trend on all the lenses. Redmi K50 Ultra acts like any other typical Xiaomi smartphone and generated photos with a bit warm color temperature, a bit saturation, and things are different than what it is in reality. I really do not like the color curve of this Redmi K50 Ultra. It seems pretty similar to Redmi Note series smartphones. Rather, Motorola has really exceeded my expectations. Before we check main sensor night mode photos, let's check ultra-wide photos. We have already seen that Redmi K50 Ultra's ultra-wide performance is truly inferior to this Motorola X30 Pro, and that has continued, so Redmi K50 Pro has continued to wobble. Exposure, brightness and contrast is better in Motorola, while Redmi has suffered with awkward color temperature and more importantly less detail is an issue. K50 Ultra nighttime ultra-wide photos are slightly overexposed, sometimes there is no balance between highlights and shadow. X30 Pro has grabbed more detail, processed textures with clarity, and noise cancellation is also noticeably better than K50 Ultra. This point goes to X30 Pro. I didn't have any big expectations from these smartphones. I mean, I thought I would get very ordinary night mode photos, but when I was doing this camera comparison video, when I was checking the photos side by side, I have got shocked. Motorola X30 Pro has done as good as any other super flagships. After checking 50 photos side by side, I have noticed that there are a few things which is making them different. In daytime, X30 Pro has kept the tone warm, and in nighttime photos, Redmi K50 Ultra has kept the tone warm. It's not only warm, it's a bit too warm. Anyway, saturation is always high on Redmi K50 Ultra, and if you dig deeper and compare low-light photos taken in harsh lighting condition, then noise and grains are actually heavier on Redmi K50 Ultra. Also, images grabbed by Redmi K50 Ultra looks a bit soft with less details, while Motorola X30 Pro has more detail, well-processed textures, less noise and grains. Everything seems a bit more polished on Motorola. I use my own method of checking night mode photos. I call it DENS: detail, exposure, noise and shadow. Considering all these four factors, it is clear that Motorola X30 Pro has done better. I will wait for your comment about this. Do you think Redmi should have released this Redmi K50 Ultra? Motorola has used its 2x optical zoom, while Redmi K50 Ultra has used its main sensor to grab zoom photos. I have to repeat the same old story one more time. It has already become tiring and boring because this Redmi K50 Ultra has continued to fail beside this Motorola X30 Pro. It is hard to believe that a Redmi smartphone is getting thrashed by a Motorola smartphone. X30 Pro with its dedicated telephoto lens have produced better zoom photos. It also have better synthetic processing, no matter whether it's a 2x zoom or a 5x zoom. X30 Pro is well ahead. These video clips were recorded in 4K 30 frames per second. Redmi has totally failed to maintain exposure and brightness. I'm sad, I'm frustrated. Anyway, Motorola X30 Pro has more detail, better shadow, better texture processing, and altogether Motorola X30 Pro has reproduced a better low-light video clip. But it's not as great as any other super flagships. It's just better than Redmi K50 Ultra and some other budget flagships. Redmi has failed to neutralize white balance, failed to process noise and shadow. These video clips were recorded in 4K 60 frames per second. After checking these video clips side by side, I am truly speechless. I will leave these to you. If you are waiting for a verdict, then I can say this was a straight whitewash. Redmi K50 Ultra has just got trashed by Motorola X30 Pro. Yeah, Motorola X30 Pro is a bit expensive than Redmi K50 Ultra. In Chinese market, Motorola X30 Pro is almost 50 or 60 US dollars more expensive, but considering the difference in performance, I would even agree to pay 100 US dollars more for this Motorola X30 Pro. I have done another camera comparison between Motorola X30 Pro and Xiaomi 12s Ultra. I wish you will subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for that video. If you have found this video helpful, then please kindly take a while and click on the like button.